Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of infertility and miscarriage, adoption, trauma and loss, emotional impacts of childhood separation, grief, and identity struggles. Our goal is to share real life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have a very special guest today. I'm very excited for this topic. I have Anna Maria DiDio with me. She is an adoptive mother and children's author whose adoption-themed books encourage open and honest conversation between parents and children. Anna Maria's Life Adventures children's book series features stories about adoption from the point of view of the child. It all started with her memoir, Love at the Border. Anna Maria holds a BA in psychology from Villanova University and an MSW in family specialization from the University of Pennsylvania. She is the mother of two young, wonderful women and is at her most creative when she is traveling and experiencing new people, places, and things to eat, and then writing about it. And she lives in Philadelphia. Welcome, Anna Maria. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So, as many of my listeners know, I have struggled with infertility for many years, and I've been very open about it on this podcast. But one of the things that I frequently hear and get is, why don't they just adopt? Why don't they just adopt? And I think adoption is amazing. And I think that it's not for everyone also. So, I'm very excited to hear your story. I don't know, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with your infertility journey, maybe?
Yes, because it was such, I often joke it took 10 years and two husbands for me to have a child.
Two husbands. Wow. It took me 8 years and one husband, but I still don't have a child. That's funny.
So I began, it was time to start trying, for that wonderful word, trying
Mm.
a child. And nothing was happening for a while. But finally, I was pregnant. But about 6, 8 weeks later, I had a miscarriage. So that was really the beginning of discovering what was really amiss.
Yeah.
And let's just say infertility issues are, I think, just a very specific type of isolation.
Mhm.
You go through it and you think you're the only one going through it. Of course, there are others that also have those issues. But it was unclear at that point where to go, and my marriage was really not doing well. So ultimately, we did divorce.
Did
And
you
so
think the infertility stuff contributed to that?
I do, because I was unhappy. And then when the realization hit that I was looking, I'm going to have this child, I'm going to have this baby, I'm going to have, oh, good, we're going to be a family. And then when that didn't happen, it was just such kind of a wake up call. What kind of life are you living here? If that was going to be the only thing that was going to make you happy. And it really was just everything, nothing felt right. Ultimately, I remarried, but the infertility issues were still there, but we had the time and I had the spousal support to figure out exactly what was wrong. We did that and then nothing happened. So some of the intervention and drugs and things continued, and we decided, you know what, we are going to look into adoption. So we searched for agencies and filled out papers and interviews and things, and then I got pregnant. So
That's what they all tell me that happens.
So the explanation was that because all this intervention had taken place and we were on a cycle for various fertility drugs, and when those stopped, the rebound effect. That was the word they used. The rebound effect was the ovulation and everything worked. And I'll just say that because the pull to motherhood, I've just never experienced anything like it. So a lot of people said to me the same thing as I was going through it and just being mopey. I'll tell you one thing that really was interesting. In my book, Love at the Border, I begin with that story, always trying to encourage readers to write reviews of my book. So in the book, I relate a story as to how, I'll say an acquaintance. We weren't like really friends, but we knew each other occasionally. And she married, and we were the same age, a little bit older. And she became pregnant right away. And I just could not handle it. I just couldn't even talk to her. And so, anyway, the person reviewing my book said, "What a terrible person this author was. She couldn't even be happy for her friend." I thought that was so mean. And it was just something I was trying to convey, the devastation that this.
It's very honest. We all feel that way. Just not everybody says it. And it's not, I think it's very important to say that it's not that you weren't happy for your friend, because we wouldn't wish these issues on anyone. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, truly. But it makes you really sad for your own situation. And it's a jealousy, really, is what it boiled down. Yeah.
And then ultimately you withdraw. So I was withdrawing from a lot of things, and it was just very depressing. But I thought that was so interesting that whoever was reading the book said, "Oh, what a terrible person she was. She couldn't even be happy for her friends."
That's so terrible, because you really don't know until you walk this journey.
So interestingly enough, though, when I did get pregnant, I never really believed it. I know that sounds really silly, but we would go to the doctor. I thought, this is nice that we're making all the right moves, checking things out. But this, in my head, this is not going to happen for me. And even at the hospital, I told the nurse, "You know what? I don't think this is going to work." When I was in labor, it was just, you just get in this mindset that the disappointment and just the feeling you have about yourself, it just took over everything. And I blamed myself being not a strong enough person to overcome that. So it was really a sad time. So when we finally did have our baby girl, and then it was just, then another kind of life took over, but we obviously wanted a bigger family. But by that point, I was years older. And as it turns out, the time for an infant passed us by. We were then looking into what are the foster to adopt situations, what are the state laws, the various state laws, what other agencies. So we began that whole process, and we had an agency close, an agency tell us that was not the right fit. So that was another sort of just process that you had to steel yourself to. So ultimately, we decided on an international adoption.
Okay.
That we had a child, and we didn't want to start one process and then have it, perhaps the biological family change their mind, or the foster to adopt situation was unclear, uncertain. So ultimately, so I'll just tell you the story quickly about, I saw an article in the paper about children from an orphanage in Mexico going to a summer camp. In the very bottom of the article, it said, "These children are eligible for adoption." And they were the same age as my daughter. So she was like 6 or 7 by that point.
Okay.
We began that process and ultimately adopted a girl, and that took 2 years. So our biological daughter was 8, and our adopted daughter was 6, almost 7.
And let's talk about that for a minute, because I feel like it's brought up to me like it's an easy process, right? So like you just decide you're going to adopt a baby, and you go out and you get a baby and you come home and then you have a baby. And that's not the truth. I've heard of a lot of people doing international adoptions because the domestic adoptions are really hard and there's wait lists. And I actually have a friend that's actually a friend of a friend, but this couple decided to adopt domestically, and the guy, through business or something, had been sued previously. I don't really know what for, But he said he would rather be sued again than go through the adoption process because it's so invasive. It's so difficult. It's so long. And so I know of a lot of people that have gone the international route, but it's interesting that you said it still took 2 years to go through that.
Yes. From beginning to end, putting all your paperwork together, and then Mexico asked that we visit the orphanage to meet her first. So it was 3 trips.
Oh,
So this
wow.
is not an inexpensive adventure either. So
Right.
it's money, it's time, it's energy, it's a lot of adjustment. And you're right about the domestic process there. And then also the international alternatives are closing. So China
Yeah.
announced that they're closing. Ethiopia
Really?
had been announced. So all these, because there had been so many issues. I know Guatemala had issues.
Yeah, I
And
have a client who adopted for her son, who's now like 18 or 19 from Guatemala. And she had a wonderful experience. She really enjoyed it and she was ready to do it again. And then they did IVF and had twins instead. But she had a lovely process. And when I was doing my own research on adoption, I saw that they closed it because of child trafficking.
yes, yes, and children were represented as orphans when they were not. And women were, it's a very poor country.
Yeah.
And it was some of the stories that I've read were just unbelievable.
Mhm.
So it's such a big decision. And you're right, I did gloss over it a little bit. We made that decision, but once you start looking into it, the first time we looked into it, I had a phone book and I just called every listing in A under adoption. And it was, again, it's another thing. It just takes over your life and there's no, and you put yourself out there in so many ways. We had a huge book of our essays and reference letters and photographs and psychological evaluations, medical evaluations, a video of us talking about it's just, and I just and bear the thought. Anyone who said they got pregnant by accident, I had to cross them off my Christmas list. I'm just kidding.
I love that. I shouldn't love that, but it's so true. I don't know. I have a couple of very dear friends that had expressed to me that they had struggled with their periods, just their cycles in general. And they thought, oh, I'll probably have to do something like you're doing. I'll probably have to look into IVF. And then next thing you know, I'm getting a text message. It's so we're pregnant. And I'm like, and again, not that I wasn't happy for them. I love them dearly. I love their children dearly. I'm still good friends with them, but I bawled my eyes out when I got those text messages. And I did have to put some space there for a little bit. Now, both their children are like 5 and 6 years old. So that's a while ago now. But it's one of the hardest things I have ever had to go through in my life. And I think the hope part of it, would you speak to that as far as your infertility journey and your adoption journey? Because I'm in a place right now where I'm afraid to hope for it anymore. Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radientresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, I don't, that says it all. That just says it all because every month, we would have a strategy, excuse me. And the strategy would be X different type of drug or the ultrasounds telling us this, so we can't do this or that. And once we were given a green light to go or whatever we were doing, you just began to think about the life that you wanted, the family that I wanted.
Yeah.
It was, to me, it was like physically draining. And as I said, it took over looking back on it, I think it took over even my career decisions.
Yes.
I stayed in one job way longer than I should have, because I was just busy with I didn't have the mental energy to look for something else and do all these things that professional women are supposed to do. I was just exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And I often wonder, it seems silly now, but like, why is that true? Am I remembering correctly? And I think I am. It just was the most important thing in my life for years. And it's very hard to, it's very hard to talk about it. I found very few people understood it really. No one
Yeah.
really wanted to hear it. So
How many years ago did you go through this?
my girls are 20, 29, and 30.
Okay.
So this was, and so the adoption, so it was about 20 years ago. So it was because they were 8 and 9, like
Yeah,
7 and 8.
that was a different time too. Like now I think a lot more people talk about it, or at least in my world they do, but that's because I've landed in that world. But I think back then, especially even miscarriages weren't talked about. Like it was just not widely talked about. And did you do IVF then, or did you just do some different other things? Because I know IVF was probably relatively new at that point too. If
Yeah,
even
no, we did not do IVF just because, according to my blood work, they didn't think that would really be a good thing a path to go down. And that's when we had our daughter, and we decided that the timing was not right. And we started to look into all the adoption alternatives.
yeah. So how long did it take from the time you decided to look into the adoption? Because you said you started with domestic and then it took 2 years for the international adoption. I guess you said you had your daughter, you were pregnant with your daughter when you started looking into the adoption. Is that correct?
For the first time. Yeah. The
Yeah.
first time we were looking into it, and then I got pregnant. So
Yeah.
then we stopped and we called the agency, oh, take us off the list. And so then years went by, and then it was about 3 years later we began to think. Actually, what happened was, about, I think, 4 years later, I was pregnant again, and that was my third miscarriage. So
Oh,
that was when we had final, oh, not final. We could have kept maybe doing other things, but the physicians were saying, no, it's probably not going to happen.
and you really have to make that decision for yourself too at some point. I had to make the decision to walk away from fertility treatments for my own mental health because I couldn't keep putting myself through that over and over and over. I did numerous rounds. And in the beginning, I was like, we just keep doing this until we have success. And then here I am several years later. Oh my gosh, I'm so drained. I can't do this anymore. And I think it's really important to find your limits and call it quits at some point. You have to, or move
Right.
on to something else like adoption.
Right. And that's what we decided to do. And honestly, the international route was the route for us because of all those things. It was something that, when we looked into this adoption from Mexico, there was a local agency that was involved, and they had quite a few success stories. So that was enough for me, that in this
Yeah.
age group, we wanted a girl age 5 to 7, and we were guaranteed. And I hate that word because I thought, yeah, I'm going to get my hopes up. But it did work out. But it was, let me tell you, it was a very difficult process. 3 trips to Mexico and all kinds of, after we had been through and satisfied the adoption requirements earlier that we didn't need to, but then going through it all again was, oh my goodness. But it did work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, will you tell me a little bit? Were you very open with your daughter about that she was adopted and things like that?
Oh, yes. She was 6, almost 7.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. So she,
Remembered, and she had, every adoption begins with trauma. So
yeah.
even at that age, she had it, I'll say, a double dose, because she had 6, almost 7 years of memories and people think of an orphanage as, a, I don't know, a not so wonderful environment, but it was a loving place where the
Mm.
women took care of them. And she had 30 playmates every day. And I remember the first time and she spoke Spanish, so that was one of our language hurdles that we had to overcome. But we, when she was in our home initially, we had someone actually come from the orphanage and visit with us. That's another story. But she said to the woman in Spanish that she was bored. I said, "What is she saying?" She's saying she's bored. I thought, "Lord, are you kidding me?" So we had a swim club and all these activities, and it was summertime. But she was used to playing with 30. Of course, when you're coming from 30 other kids that you love, and she missed
Yeah.
friends, and she could not speak English, and it was devastating. So that was my introduction into adoption trauma. Um, it was a lesson and a half, let me tell you.
It's tough for an adult to move countries for the language barrier, the cultural differences, things like that. And although it may not manifest the same way with a kid that's 6 years old, that's definitely still traumatizing there. How did you guys work on English with her then?
We hired a tutor,
Okay.
and we had a fun game of it. The tutor would teach a little Spanish to our daughter and then English to our adopted daughter. So we supported her all throughout. Within 6 months, of course, she was totally fluent and did not remember any of her Spanish, which
Mm,
in fact is another form of trauma. So
okay.
it was another loss for her. And and at one point, when she could verbalize things, she was angry, and which I can totally understand at this point. Why did you even adopt me if you can't even speak Spanish? What's
Oh.
wrong with you? And I thought she's got a point there. But then English quickly took over all of our lives. But then when middle school happened and she started those first classes again of Spanish,
Oh.
something really happened. I could see it. It made her so happy, and her accent was beautiful, and the language came back to her. And then high school, college. So she's fluent now and has worked years helping in the Hispanic community in Phil. We live in Philadelphia. So,
That's super interesting that she forgot it, but then it came back to her later on. It is her native language.
and I guess all those linguistic connections formed that once she heard it, the teachers just loved her because she could just see the patterns and the phrasing and the feminine, masculine, the tenses, she just got it all, and it was remarkable. So anyway, it was a big win for her to reclaim that.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. So, has she ever tried to reach out to her biological mom?
It's not something currently, she says it's not something that she's interested in. I think because all these years later, we've kept in touch with the women at the
Okay.
orphanage. We had a chance to go back and visit them. My older daughter actually did a summer internship there, and
Oh,
we went back to
cool.
visit. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. And then my daughter did a study abroad program in Mexico, and she had the chance to visit. And Facebook, Instagram, there's those things keep her connected. And she, years and years ago, I think in college, she switched all of her phone communication to Spanish. So she keeps in touch with a lot of folks there, which has been great for her.
That's amazing. How do you think you would feel if she wanted to seek out her biological mom? Obviously, you guys have had that conversation.
And we've talked about it. As I said, right now she's not interested. I told her I would support her, but she would have to drive it, and I don't want to do it for her. Right now, I really think the connections that she has in Mexico have been enough for her. So we haven't taken it any further.
Yeah, it's just interesting because we live in a world where the DNA testing makes it a lot easier to find those people, and there are ways to find them. And I don't know, that's one of the things I've always thought about, and maybe in a selfish way because I've not ever been through that. Oh no, but I'm this kid's mom now. So I could see that being a hurtful thing, but also you can't blame these kids for wanting to know.
Exactly. And I think that's the secret to healthy, thriving families. If any of your listeners have adopted or are considering it, so the best practice, the advice is to tell the child as soon as soon as possible, even before the concept of adoption is really understood. So they know their story, they know what, and you're right, there's a piece of that a little bit that's still missing for her,
Yeah.
how she came to the orphanage. But for her, and she has many years to think about that yet. So she may change your mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's really you to be open to that if she did want to do that. Yeah, because I don't know, there's a lot of people nowadays too that are finding out via those DNA tests that they were adopted and they didn't know, or they were sperm or egg donors and they didn't know. What are your thoughts on, you said they should share the adoption stuff right away. Do you think it's the same for like donor stuff too?
I'm not as familiar with kind of the dynamics of those decisions.
Hmm.
To me, the things I've read always seem to be I'll say, negative or traumatic reactions or consequences are when information is concealed or withheld.
Yes.
So to me, it seems, I understand that it would be difficult. To me, it just seems, and there is such betrayal if you find out these things later.
Yeah.
So that's why I've consistently read that it's honesty and openness are really the best for, again, for this self-image and self-confidence and identity, and all those things are so important for children as they develop, and they have to have the real true information in order to do that. So you're exactly right. I'm still hearing from people, we don't really talk about that, or he or she, my child doesn't really know X or Y. And I'm thinking, and I don't give people, if people ask me, I would say, but I give people advice if they're not asking for it. But yeah,
Yeah, sure. I'm just
it
curious because you have that stance on adoption that you should be honest about it. And I definitely agree with that. And I think that people probably think they're protecting their kids a little bit. But also, I just think, especially with the risk of them finding out by doing an ancestry.com test or something like that, like it would be better to come from the parents, I would think. So,
that's one of the unique things that I do with my books, because the children's books are ages, I'll say 4 to 8, 4 to 10, and they raise these issues in an attempt to help parents have those conversations. And what I'm trying to communicate and help parents with is the message that it's natural for an adopted child to think about their birth mother, their birth family. What is my story? And it's not threatening, but the thought that once the adoption happens, that the door is closed and we're happy and we're loving and it's all just balloons and rain. Oh, isn't this great? We're a family now. Yes, but a very specific, a very special kind of family. And the child really needs to know and embrace their story. And together, the family, I think that would just pay such big dividends later, because trauma can happen at any point. I know a lot of families think that no, she was adopted when she was just an infant and we've loved her every moment since. Well, that's true, but her story is quite different. And again, through my books, I'm hoping to encourage conversation and help the parents just not to feel threatened by those things. And that can just yield a healthy mindset for everyone.
yeah. Yeah. What type of, you referenced the language issues and stuff like that. If somebody does adopt from infant or younger or domestic or whatever, can you explain what type of traumas could happen? Just so that if people are considering it, maybe to be aware of.
As a child grows and just becomes aware of what is the makeup of their family, there are going to be questions. And one of the things I focus in on in one of my books, and the book is called How I Wonder Where You Are. And the trigger event for children, adopted children, is as simple as a family tree. My daughter had a family tree assignment soon
Oh,
after she move to the United States. And so we struggled with this. She was meeting relatives for the first time. She didn't know their names. It's something that will cause the child to think about, who do I look like? Where do I come from? And who do I look like? And in the book, the books are all inspired by our family
Sure.
events, but they're not exactly about my family, because my daughters would kill me if I wrote any more about them. They said, okay, Mom, stop writing. So this is about a girl, her name's Carla, and she's adopted from Colombia. And she thinks, when I go to the supermarket, I see women that look like me. Could she be my mother? And she has that thought, even though she knows her mother is in a different country. And so these are the things I try to raise in my book and address what is sometimes referred to as the myth of adoption, that
Okay.
everything's wonderful and we have this child now. And but no, if you don't give that child space to process the trauma, process their story and know their story, it leads to uh, self-confidence and identity issues and questions and all that. And I'm not saying the love isn't there. There are families, adoptive families, that are wonderful and loving. And of course, I believe in the process because I've done it, but it's important to acknowledge what adopted children need in
Mhm.
order to thrive in their families.
Do they try to prepare you for that in that adoption process leading up to it? Or is it mostly just like, how much money do you have? How stable are you?
It's an interesting question because I've not been a part of the process in quite a few years. So I wondered the same thing. I should look into that. But the certainly the again, I'll just use trauma is overused today, and I get that, but that is certainly minimized in my view. It was minimized for us. And it wasn't until I said in my memoir that our daughter just cried for months. And
Mm.
then once she was somewhat used to living with us, and I'm not saying it was all bitter tears and torture. We had many wonderful moments as a family, loving, and but I still would see that wondering, that separation, that denial, that and all those are just manifestations of trauma. There's that book now I'm rereading, The Body Knows Trauma. And
Mm,
just is it's part of who they are.
yeah.
And I'm trying to open up that conversation.
Yeah, because I've heard of things like if people adopt different races and things like that, even just domestically, that they have to do some counseling, some classes, sometimes even move if they're in a predominantly white area or a predominantly black neighborhood or whatever, just to make it easier for the child and things like that. So I just wonder how much they prep you for the psychological stuff
No,
too.
no, there really wasn't the prep. We did what I don't know. To me, it made perfect sense. I wanted to embrace her culture as much as
That.
we could. Of course, we didn't speak Spanish, but on my website, I have some recipes, food we made together. Her ability to spice up her food was ever present. And so at maintaining contact, sending pictures. She had the most adorable pictures of she played soccer, was in brownies, and we wanted to keep the folks in Mexico aware of her progress and how she was doing. And that I think that tie was very important. And so when she was in middle school and got a phone, then she, as I said, she started on Facebook and saw so many of the kids that she had grown up with, as well as some of the caregivers, and maintain contact. And that was a real plus for her.
Did many of those kids end up adopted here in the US? Or are they all still in Mexico?
No, this particular agency stopped their adoption service, I guess I'll say, many years ago, just because there are so many requirements. This now this was like a private agency, and
Okay.
now adoptions still take place. I just read about one the other day in Mexico, but through the state agency. So
Okay.
this was not a state agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just interested. So are a lot of them still in Mexico then? Just adults in Mexico now? The ones she keeps
That
in
she
touch with?
grew up with, yeah, that she grew up with, yeah, because I mean, I don't have a specific age, but I think 17, 18, they can go to university and continue their schooling or go out on their own. So many of them have done that.
That's really cool. What part of Mexico are you willing to share that?
Cuernavaca.
Oh, I don't even know where that is.
It's about 90 minutes outside of Mexico City,
Oh,
into Mexico City.
very nice. So when did you decide to write your memoir?
When I retired, I had been keeping a journal and notes for many years and thought just the experience that we went through in the process was unique and I wanted to write about it. I've always enjoyed writing, but when you're in a corporate job day to day, there's just not that, again, that mental space.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what, I'm going to pull all this together and write a book. So then it was, and I really enjoyed it, writing and commenting on and thinking about things that I hadn't thought about in years and writing about it. But then when that process was over, I thought, what is the most important thing I need to say to parents? And then that's when the three children's books became. I looked for an illustrator and thought the best way to really talk to parents is give them an opportunity to read some of this together with their children.
Yeah.
And then recently I had the idea to write a book for middle graders, and my latest book is called Grace's Right Time. So Grace is she's a girl who recently moves and she's always had trouble making friends, but she reads and she writes, she keeps a journal, and she meets a boy in her new school named Andy, and he's adopted, but
Oh,
the private adoption because of his parents wished that, but he enlists the help of Grace to help him find his birth mother. So they have a secret adventure to find his birth mother. So again, the lesson is more information in the beginning is always better.
yeah.
So anyway, I'm trying to appeal to different audiences and groups and hope to convey that message.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're showing the positive side of it too, because I feel like for me personally, I've unfortunately seen a lot of negative adoption stories. So I love hearing about the positive ones because I feel like for me anyways, there's been a lot less of those. So unfortunately, I've heard all the stories of the biological moms changing their minds and then I actually knew somebody who adopted from a different country who gave the kids or tried to give the kids back, just a bunch of that kind of stuff. So it's really nice to hear the happy, good story. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, they're both amazing girls and they're completely opposite personalities, which was not easy, very competitive with each other. So it was, let's just say that's an interesting point because it was not the harmonious, yay, we're one big happy family. They were two so different in their wants and needs and friends and but ultimately it's worked. Now that they're older, I think it's working even a little bit better. But
Yeah, sure. I think we all go through those phases. I have two younger sisters, and one of them is 4 years younger than me, and we're very close now. But when we were younger, it was off and on. We were close when we were really young. And then when I became a teenager and she was still young, we butt heads basically until she became an adult and we were on the same page again. Yeah. But I don't know, even if you have a child biologically and from birth or whatever, I think that we try to paint this perfect picture of what that looks like. And I actually just had one of my interviews that is going to come out before this one. I talked to a girl about postpartum depression and things like that. And it's not a walk in the park to have kids at all in any capacity, however you do it.
yeah, it's so true. We're just inundated with all of the, oh, I don't know, what the nursery looks like, all the mommies groups and the how you can balance everything and it's really so individual. So that's what I don't think today we leave enough space for people to have their own individual stories. It always seems like it's got to be this way and you got to be it got to have matching coverlets. I don't know. It's just all so predetermined.
Mhm.
Your nursery should look like this. And I'm trying to give my girls space. My older daughter's married, and I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna let them do their thing and
Yeah.
without children, and who knows.
Yeah, every once in a while I get a client I'm waiting for grandkids and I tell them all the time, I'm waiting for grandkids. And I'm like, oh,
It's
Don't
not.
do that. I'm like, what if they're trying and they're struggling and they're not sharing that with you? Or what if they don't want them? That's a thing too nowadays, a lot more than it used to be. And I think that parents need to respect those decisions.
It just, yeah, totally butt out. It's just can't, it's too big a, but you mentioned you're, that's one of the things I always say. Folks say, what should I consider if I'm thinking about adoption? And the biggest issue that I really didn't do enough of was really network and form a community of parents that had adopted. I did
Okay.
that after the fact, but before, it's good to hear those stories, read those books, and I've read some horrific stories.
Yeah.
Oh, and now that obviously Netflix is on every minute, there's all these, there are some movies, and oh my goodness, there's so much out there. I
Yeah,
mean, good.
currently there's a new IVF movie that came out on Netflix. I think it's called Joy.
I just saw it. Yeah,
Yeah, was it good?
I loved it, but it
Yeah,
was.
I'm interested to watch it and see. I'm afraid of it being a little bit triggering currently, but the trailer looks like they did a really good job talking about the whole thing. A little bit of comedy in there, a little bit of tears. So joy, all of it.
And the recognition that this woman that could not have children was so instrumental in helping and could see, and it's very difficult to overcome the cultural barriers. We just can't imagine what that was like.
Yeah.
That people thought that, well, let's not get into religion, and there was all kinds of battlegrounds, and unfortunately, they're still going on.
Yeah.
So it's very tough. It's very tough. But she was just an unsung hero. I was amazed. But yeah, you will, for the most part, you'll see just how wonderful she is.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to check it out. It's on my to watch list. I just haven't sat down and done it yet. So,
There's another movie about the lost daughter.
oh, tell me about that.
That is the story of a birth mother who set out to, I don't know whether reunite is too big of a word. I was watching maybe with half an eye, I don't know, but reunite or find out the status of the daughter that she had given up for adoption many years ago. So the birth mother is, I'm going to say in her 60s, she's older.
Okay.
And she finds out that, and I don't want to, but she finds out that her adopted daughter had a terrible life.
Oh, no.
It's very, I'll just say it's very hard to watch. It's called, I forget what the name. There's something in front of it, and then the lost daughter. There's
Okay.
something, but it's an unbelievable story that is, I can't stop thinking about it. It was,
Oh, because I think as a biological parent, you think you're going to give your child up and they're going to have a better life than what you could give them. I would imagine that's what most of those moms are thinking. And then to find out that they did not has to be absolutely heartbroken. I'm trying to look it up here on my phone. Is it Into the Fire?
I think so, yes. Into the Fire, the Lost Daughter.
Yeah. Oh, it's new and it's a series.
Yes, it's two episodes, so it's
Oh,
not
oh,
not long.
okay. All right. Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter. If anybody wants to, I guess it's a sad story. But oh man, I know sometimes Hollywood. We watched an old one the other day, Children of Men. Did you watch that?
Yeah.
So
Oh, oh, is that the one with all the infertility? Yeah,
yeah, it was really hard to watch. I'm not gonna lie, but like it's this whole journey of the whole world. There hasn't been a baby born in 20 years. And then this woman turns up pregnant and everybody's trying to protect her, but it's literally like a war zone all around and it's wild. And they say infertility rates are rising. I hope that's not the future, but one of those post-apocalyptic situations that we see in the movies, but we don't really want to ever happen.
mm.
Are you currently writing any more books that you can talk
Yes, yes. I for the Grace is Right Time for the middle grade audience. As I said, Grace and Andy work together to find his birth mother. And at the end, I'll leave that to your listeners to figure out. But there's going to be another part to that. So I'm writing a follow-up book. So it may be, again, 3 books.
Okay.
It's hard to promote when you're self-published. It's not easy to promote just one book. So I have 3 for children that are 4 to 8, and now I'm hoping to have 3 for a middle grade audience. And I'd love to just keep writing because my goal is to write about all blended families. There are so many ways to create a family today that, foster children and stepchildren and their families are changing so much. So I wanted to explore a lot of those topics and write about them, again, to promote conversation and awareness for kids so they know that what they're thinking and feeling is normal and can be discussed, hopefully.
Yeah, I love that. What final, maybe parting words do you have for either people considering adoption or that have adopted? What do you have?
I mentioned one is that develop that network of families that can provide support before, during, and after, because it's just interesting and affirming to hear what other people are going through.
Yeah.
So nowadays, though, unlike there are so many more resources that are easily accessible, and there are professionals at every stage in the process that can really guide couples or individuals in the process. And I say that because just in writing this book, I sought out a couple of those people to read the book and see what they thought, and they provided some guidance. And there are adoption coaches now, or coaches that help with parents as they're waiting or provide guidance. First, the decision to do your research, the decision to do a domestic route or an international route. Other countries may have opened up that I'm not familiar with. I just saw something on a blog that someone was adopting from Hungary.
Okay.
I read that really quickly, but that's not a country that I had thought of previously. So there may be a lot of things out there where the most current information could be valuable. And then seek out the professionals. We had a wonderful woman who was like a play therapist when our daughter first moved to the United States, and helped us as a family with some fun and communication. And then as she grew, her problems were different. So the issues as a teenager, we sought someone that was adept at hearing about those middle school and teen years and helping us through some of those issues. There are professionals that are really helpful along with your research and network that got us through the process, and I know would be a help to many families.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Because it is not an easy process, right? Even after the adoption process.
Yes, because of the thing that we're talking about is there's so much that happens in that child's mind. So it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't even touch on the cost of all of this either. Financially, my understanding is it's quite expensive to do all these things too.
Yes, there are some agencies out there, I know, Help Us Adopt, and some other agencies that provide grants to families that need assistance. So they're wonderful. But yeah, it needs to be more about the children. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about the costs. It was tremendously expensive for us as well. And as I said, 3 trips to Mexico. And so you be prepared for all of that, or be able to do that. Or again, there's agencies now that have grants that are.
That's good to know. Awesome. Do you have anything else you want to share with my listeners?
Just that the books are available and are wonderful conversation starters for your family. And my website is amdidio.com. That's amdidio.com. And so my author bio is there, and some other photographs of our journey, recipes, and one thing that I love to just focus on is the adoptee identity. And I have a what I call an affirmation fun sheet. So
Oh,
there's lots of
cool.
affirmations for children to kind of learn and add their own. And that's available on my website. Sign up for my newsletter. And if you read a book, give me a review. So I'd love to hear your feedback.
Amazing. And I will link all of that in the show notes too. So I'll put your website in there and then ways to get your books and all of that. So if anybody is looking or wants more information, check out the show notes. That might be the easiest way. And then I assume you're on social media and stuff like that, or is the website the best way?
Facebook and Instagram too.
All right. Awesome. Then we will link all of that in the show notes so that people can get a hold of you if they need to. Thank you so much, Anna Maria, for coming on here and sharing your story.
It was great to share with you a kindred kind of spirit with the struggles, but I really appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable and putting your story out there, and keep writing the books. They look amazing. I'm going to check out your Love at the Border book, I think, because obviously I don't have kids to share those kids' books with, but I would love to read your memoir. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.